You're here, so you probably know. But just in case you don't, we are in the mother of all trouble. I'm not going to go into it in great detail. Just going to mention two recent developments which are very clear indicators of that trouble. So firstly, we just spent the last year globally above 1.5 degrees centigrade above average pre-industrial temperatures. Might all sound a bit complicated. The short translation is scientists worldwide agreed that 1.5 was the absolute maximum we could go to of global overheat and remain broadly in something worth calling the safe zone. It's not really safe, right? We've already seen a lot of horrible stuff happening below 1.5 degrees, but they said, look, you go above 1.5 degrees, you're really into complete terra incognita. It's all going to be very difficult, very hard to control in any sense, grim, etc. And scientists used to say, yeah, and you know, maybe we can stay below 1.5 degrees. That'll be brilliant. If we go above it, that won't happen until the 2030s or 2040s or 2050s or something. And now we've just spent a year over 1.5 degrees. And in fact, spent some of that year over 2 degrees above average global overheat temperatures before industrial times. The other little factoid I'd like to bring your attention is less certain as an indicator of bad news, but in a way even much more serious, especially actually for us in this country. Some of you will have heard of the new study about the AMOC current, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Current. I think that's right. And this is basically the world's main ocean current system. It's actually technically more significant for our climate than the Gulf Stream is. It's interrelated with the Gulf Stream. But basically, if the AMOC current turns off, if it shuts down, that means that countries such as this one are suddenly plunged into a situation where their winter temperatures are 10 to 30 degrees centigrade below what they currently are. So you thought that we were in a situation where the world was just getting hotter and hotter, but actually it's a lot more complicated than that. The horrible irony, and this has happened in geological history, is that it is entirely possible that because of the heating up of the world's temperatures, which we're all familiar with, the Arctic and Greenland are melting at unprecedented rates. That's shoving this vast amount of cold, fresh water into the North Atlantic and may shut down this absolutely vital current. So we've been in a situation in this country where we're used to thinking, well, at least we've got a reasonably kind of temperate zone here. And unlike those poor buggers in Spain and Greece and Bangladesh and Australia and so on and so forth. But if the AMOC shuts down, that will throw us right onto the climate front line, and it will really not be pretty. Try growing food at 20 or 30 degrees centigrade below where we currently are. Good luck with that. Hopefully it's not going to happen. If it does happen, hopefully it won't happen till the 21st century. But there are worrying signs that it is starting to happen. There are also worrying signs that the models that scientists have of this current are not robust. In other words, that they have been understating so far how much of this shutting down of the AMOC is going on. And this is one of many examples of how the situation is actually the opposite of what it is often said to be. People often say, oh, but isn't there a chance that the climate scientists are being alarmist? You less often hear, isn't there a chance that the climate scientists are understating the trouble that we're in? And what's happening with AMOC may well turn out to be a really consequential example of scientists tending on balance to understate the trouble that we're in. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, have said, oh, AMOC shutdown is very unlikely, less than 10% chance this century. The new study suggests that that's wrong, and that the estimations have been underestimations, perhaps chronic underestimations of how much we're exposed to that risk. Now, of course, somebody could say, yes, but it's still not really likely to happen. That's right. How comfortable would you feel getting on a plane? I mean, I'm not advising getting on a plane, but how comfortable would you feel getting on a plane, if you were told, well, you know, there's a 60% chance you'll arrive, it's not exactly a clean bill of health, is it? So these are just two news stories from the last few weeks. They should have been bigger news stories. The Amok news story didn't even make it onto the BBC. I asked our high-level contact at the BBC why. He replied, "We covered it last July," which I have to say was not a reply which impressed me very much. So we're in really, really terrible trouble. The trouble is accentuated by the fact that we are continuing to burn greenhouse gases at as high a rate as we ever had, and by the fact that polls for the European elections suggest that Greens will not do very well and that the far right will advance. Trump is the favorite to win the US presidential election, a climate change denier. We're in such dire trouble. How can the climate majority play its part in relation to this situation? Well, what is the climate majority? So, as we go into this situation of unprecedented peril, which most people still don't really have a very clear idea at all of how much peril we're in, as we go into that situation, you might think that the natural response is, well, that just means we need to get more radical. We need to do the same thing as we've been doing so far, only do it harder, faster, louder, rougher, nastier, perhaps. My view and that of my colleagues is very different. What we think is, what is happening, and I don't know if you sense this, I would be interested in talking with you about it when we get to the Q&A. What is happening is that quite a lot of people, not as many as we need, but quite a lot of people are waking up, and more are waking up all the time as we go into this unprecedented, unparalleled, awful situation. Very, very many are not, otherwise there wouldn't be these terrible polls suggesting what's going to happen in the European elections, the US presidential elections, but some are, and it's incremental and it's growing all the time. Opinion polls do clearly indicate that already there is a majority of people in just about every country in the world who are concerned, not as concerned as they should be. But the point is that we're talking millions upon millions, in fact, billions of people. Now, when you're talking about truly huge numbers of people who are starting to get it, and in many, many cases are asking questions like, what should I do? If it's as bad as they say it is, something needs to change. I want to take part in this in some way. What percentage of those people are likely to get involved in full-on conventional activism, let alone non-violent direct action? And I put it to you that the answer to that question is a very, very, very small percentage. Quite against the thought that what we need to do, given how bad the situation is get more radical, more angry, etc., etc. My claim, our central claim is, no, it's actually the opposite. What we need to do is find a way of being accommodating and genuinely welcoming and including the millions and then tens and then hundreds of millions and ultimately perhaps billions who will be wanting to or needing to get on board. We need to have an approach which is genuinely open to many of those people. And this presents an exciting potential opportunity because there's a sense in which that's never really been tried before. So the climate majority is the majority of the world's people who are already concerned, the majority who need that concern to be deepened and who need to be activated to take part in action to actually make a difference to this cataclysmic situation that we are in. And just in case you're thinking, well, but that's going to be incredibly hard. Imagine actually trying to mobilize so many people. What could that possibly look like? Isn't there some kind of way in which we could do it with a much smaller number of people? Think about the ozone hole, for example, in the 1980s, right? That situation was essentially dealt with not by mobilizing the majority, but by a number of governments and a number of large corporations sorting it out at an elite level, deciding to stop using the stuff that was fatally damaging, compromising in the ozone layer, and instead to start using something different. But here's the thing. The situation that we're in vis-a-vis the climate is a completely different situation to the ozone whole situation. That's a helpful precedent, sure. It's great that there was an existential threat there and it was addressed. But of course, the difference is there is no fix of the kind that was used in the ozone hole case. You can't just move from using one set of chemicals to using a different set of chemicals and fix the climate crisis. Now, you might say, well, yes, but isn't there a bit of an analogy? Because you could go from using fossil fuels to using renewables, and wouldn't that essentially sort it? But 2 points about that. Firstly, no, it wouldn't. There are a number of other crucial aspects to the desperate trouble that we're in. This is not just a climate crisis, it's a broader ecological crisis. Even within the climate crisis part of it, it's issues to do with land use, issues to do with, for example, deforestation, issues to do with the way we farm, very pertinent, for example, here, close to the Lake District. These are a crucial part of the climate crisis. And secondly, even on the fossil fuels renewables thing, even if that was essentially the fix and the most important thing that we needed to do, you're not going to be able to sort that transformation, that huge transition, simply by appealing to a small number of elites. This is something that requires mass buy-in. The simple way to put this is that the climate crisis saturates and is saturated by virtually every aspect of our lives. There is no way we get to deal with this adequately except by having most people bought into it. You could put it this way, there is no way that we get to deal with this situation adequately except through some kind of democratic gambit. But when I say democratic, am I suggesting that the existing political system is in any kind of fit state to deal with this mother of all crises? And I'm starting to see a few kind of smirks and giggles and so on around the room. And I think you know the answer to that question before even asking it. If there is going to be a way through this, I'm going to say if there is going to be a way through this, then it is absolutely going to require us to lead rather than our so-called leaders. It's going to require us to lead them. And they'll only step up when they see that vast numbers of us are stepping up. One way we sometimes put this in the Climate Majority Project is this, that we need a new political class or a new political system. If there's a new political system, great, maybe something based on citizens' assemblies, it's conceivable, we could talk about that. If it's within something like the existing political system, we need a new political class. But how do you get a new political class? You're not going to get it with the same old electorate. The electorate, we ourselves and the citizenry at large in this country and many others around the world need to be renewed, transformed, need to have our conviction about the trouble that we're in substantially deepened, need to be helped to handle the difficult truth about just how bad a situation we're in, need to be offered paths to activation in order that they can start to take on these vast issues themselves at every scale and at every level. And only when all of that starts to happen, only when there is a movement that comes to see itself as the majority, turning the whole direction of travel that we're presently headed in and moving in some healthier and happier direction, only when we start to get all that happening will you get the kind of leadership from on high that we actually need. And that is our mission as the Climate Majority Project. Our mission is to renew electorates such that the political system ends up pointing in a completely different direction to the direction it currently points in. That is not going to happen overnight. There is no quick fix. There is no shortcut. It's not going to be fixed by standing in the road. It's not going to be fixed by technology. It's not going to be fixed by the next election. It's not going to be fixed at all. It could be gradually transformed if something like what I've been trying to describe takes place. At this point, some people may be thinking, yes, but Rupert, we don't have that time, do we? We don't have the time, it's urgent. And of course, you're right. But there is no shortcut. So there is going to be a great deal of suffering in the years to come. Things are going to get worse for a long time on the material level before they can start to get better. There is a huge need for preparedness, for resilience building, for adaptation of the right kind, transformative adaptation, strategic adaptation, to face the terrible weather challenges and other challenges that we're going to be receiving. The weather in 2024 is almost certainly going to be the worst, most brutal weather we've ever experienced, because we're in the middle now of an El Nino weather event globally. So buckle up. Adaptation is inevitably a large part now of what we have to do. And that is one part of the huge mind shift that is absolutely essential now, to get people to understand that we're not talking anymore about 2050 or even 2035. We're not talking about difficulties facing our children's lives and our grandchildren's lives. Of course, those things are super relevant, but we're talking about much more rapid impacts than those. The kinds of things we're going to see this year, which can be even worse than the kinds of things we saw last year, and then probably going on in a somewhat similar way for quite a long time to come. All of that has to be handled and borne and responded to and used as an opportunity to wake people up. This is why I say that the way that the climate movement has been kind of obsessed so far with what's called mitigation, with the idea of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, obviously that's really, really important, but it's no longer enough. And actually, the good thing about starting to focus on how we respond to and how we cope with these horrible impacts that are coming our way is that that is much more impactful in terms of waking people up than being able to talk about what might happen in 2050. So what is this climate majority project of which you've heard me speak? I've given you the broad outlines. What this is a bunch of people who have come together in the wake of Extinction Rebellion, some through exile like myself, others from outside, who have gone through the kind of thought process that I've indicated to you in brief in the last several minutes, and become clear that, incredibly hard though it sounds, and it is, we have no alternative if we want to prevent the uncontrolled collapse of our civilization, which is precisely where we are headed at the moment, and is by far the most likely outcome if you were a betting man or woman. That if we are going to have a chance at averting that uncontrolled collapse, there is no alternative but to seek to mobilize these millions and then tens of millions and so forth. And that the form that needs to take is extremely variegated. So what is the Climate Majority Project? It is, for example, an incubator. What does that mean? It means that we are looking for groups, nascent groups that are forming, that are stepping into this space of being welcoming to moderate people, to ordinary people, to all kinds of citizens, welcoming, for example, to people from rural areas as well as urban, genuinely welcoming to working class people who found it often a very inhospitable place in the previous environmental and climate movement. Welcoming to people of a different political persuasion from oneself. That's why when we formed the Climate Majority Project, we thought it was very important to get some prominent conservatives to sign our declaration of intent, our founding statement, and we did. If we're really serious about appealing to the majority, we have to be serious about appealing to these kinds of constituencies. So our incubator incubates organizations such as Lawyers for Net Zero, now renamed General Counsel Sustainability Leaders. These are senior corporate lawyers, lawyers in corporations listed in the FTSE, etc. Very unlikely candidates for climate activists. And they're not climate activists, but they are people who are serious about undertaking climate action in the firms in which they work. And what General Counsel Sustainability Leaders try to do is to help them on that journey. And it's proving quite successful so far. It's very, very new, as all the organizations we support are. Last year, its founder, Adam Woodhall, was voted Lexis Legal Personality of the Year, which is a coveted award within the legal profession. And he's the first ever non-lawyer to have won the award, because he's just somebody who thought, corporate lawyers, that could be really, really important for mobilizing an unexpected kind of climate action. I'm going to try to do that, and that's what he's doing. So we incubate and support his organization. Something very, very different. Community climate action is a mode of seeking to organize people in rural areas, including Brexit voting areas, including conservative areas, through social enterprises, through getting together and people growing food together on land that they acquire. Community climate action and Lawyers for Net Zero might seem to have very, very little in common. What they have in common is that they're all part of this emerging climate majority. And they're all in some sense pointing in the same direction towards the goal of, well, a future survival, the aversion of uncontrolled collapse and the regaining of common sense. Another of the organisations we incubate is MP Watch. And I'm glad to say that the patron saint of MP Watch, your local B-list celebrity, Mike Berners-Lee, is in the room. Mike, give us a minute on MP Watch.
MP Watch, just really quickly, I think it's a really exciting organisation. It's non-partisan. The premise of it is that we can't get anywhere at all on any of this stuff in terms of politics unless we have a basic platform of honesty that we don't have in place at the moment. And actually, it doesn't matter whether you care most about climate or cost of living or the NHS or whatever it is that you care about, you can't get anywhere on this stuff if you're being routinely misled, deliberately misled by our politicians. So what MP Watch is trying to do is trying to create, in the sort of perfect world, it would create an environment in which in every constituency, every voter knows the integrity track record of all the candidates and knows how much it matters. And they're targeting kind of key constituencies where there's particularly strong difference between the best and the worst. Really getting going at the moment. I think they've got something like 40 active groups in local constituencies at the moment. I think they're pushing that to 60. As obviously, it's not just about this election, but this election that's coming up is going to be obviously a critical moment. And it's just trying to create an environment in which it's very, very difficult to get elected if you have been if your track record is that you've been misleading, and just to take us away from the kind of routine dishonesty that we're getting everywhere at the moment. But it is emphatically a non-partisan organisation in principle. And it is really looking for, if anybody wants to help out with it, just Google MP Watch. They're looking for people who can help in all sorts of ways. People who give money even better. But they are gathering momentum fast, and I think they're right on a kind of leverage point. Which, if we can get some traction on that, then one of the most effective ways of creating conditions in which we can get some real climate.
Brilliant, thanks, Mike. So I hope you can see how that is an example of an organisation which fits the Climate Majority Project vision. So that's one of the things we do. We incubate super promising organisations such as Lawyers for Net Zero, Community Climate Action, MP Watch, extremely diverse, but all necessary components of the kind of transformation that needs to occur. What we also do is we serve as a sort of a rallying point and to some degree a network and to some degree an umbrella for a much wider range of organisations who are in this climate majority space, the organisations we collaborate with, and other organisations much more broadly than that. So, for example, in the broadest sense of the climate majority, I think it'd be pretty safe to say that the Quakers, to whom I'm proud to belong, as a number of you do, are a part of the climate majority. You can read it in any Quaker literature, some of which is outside the door here. And what we also do in the Climate Majority Project is we run our own campaigns. So I'm about to start a campaign on adaptation. It's called Strategic Adaptation for Emergency Resilience, which nicely abbreviates, and a beautiful coincidence, to SAFER, which is what we desperately need to become. There is a campaign on climate distress, specifically on destigmatizing and resourcing climate distress, wherever climate distress is reliably produced. For example, in educational institutions, when you teach kids, students, whoever, about our climatic and ecological situation, you're teaching them something which is necessarily difficult and distressing now, or otherwise you're not teaching them the truth. So they ought to be resourced to handle those difficult truths. And our third campaign is on business, is on the vital role that business can play here. Business has an enormous number of things to do in this field, all sorts of good things that business could potentially do, everything from what do you use your profits for to have you made your supply chains resilient to what kind of advertising do you do? Are you encouraging people to become material destroyers of the world or something better than that? But we argue that the most important thing of all that business could do, which it's hardly doing at all at the moment, is calling on governments to regulate the businesses in such a way that there is a higher level playing field for all, and the crap businesses can't drive out the good businesses, which is what happens a lot too much through the magic of the market at present. So our campaign stands against the sort of perceived ideology of free market fundamentalism and in favour of common sense. And the vast majority of people and the vast majority of business people actually recognise this truth, that it is essential to have much stronger regulation of business if we're to have a climatic and natural future. But not many people have been saying it. So we are saying it and starting to try to draw businesses towards us to say it with us. So we are an incubator, we are a rallying point and an umbrella. We are a campaigning organisation ourselves. When you talk about or hear about the Climate Majority Project, you're hearing about something small, which is seeking to thought lead and agitate for and represent in the media, etc., something really, really huge. And what is necessary is for that huge phenomenon to come to self-realization and to start to play its part in relation to this unprecedented more than emergency that we face. I say more than emergency because if only it was as easy as an emergency, you know, if only we could run away from it or get it sorted and then we could be back to normal. This is sometimes called a long emergency, but the term emergency even chronically understates it. This is a new condition that we are entering into. It is a predicament which is going to last for all of the lives of everyone in this room, however well we handle it. And there is no alternative but to face into it in all of its difficulty, to try to handle that difficulty, to find ways of helping ourselves and others to become activated by that truth and by that handling of it, such that we can come to know ourselves as a movement, as a truly mass movement, way beyond activism, way beyond radical, way beyond the bubbles in which we're politically comfortable, in order to start to be able to co-create, as I say, a future. It really is as simple as that. And I'll say one more thing before I stop, and then I'm looking forward to a long period of questions and discussion with what I'm sure will be a super smart audience. If we fail to arrest civilizational collapse, as appears at the moment overwhelmingly likely, then there are still two extremely massive reasons for trying to do this work and to make sure that you find your part in it. And I hope it's clear already that the way in which that can happen is extremely diverse. This is not an organization which is saying there's just one thing you have to do and that's going to fix it. It depends on who you are, what your network is, what your capabilities are. It's great to see lawyers, for example, stepping up and facing into this crisis as lawyers, or teachers as teachers. Many teachers are joining our climate distress campaign, and so on and so forth. Anyway, the two things that I want to say are the reasons why it is 1000% worth doing this, even if we end up losing. The first is coming back to the point about adaptation. If we go down this track of trying to take absolutely seriously the predicament that we're in and throwing ourselves into making it less fatal and less horrible, then even as this civilization goes down, if it does, we will be in a situation where we are at least somewhat adapted to it and somewhat ready for it. And I tell you, that's going to be so much better than if we're not. And the second reason is a more poignant one and a more existential one. And it's this: you need to have something that you can say to your children or to your grandchildren, or for that matter to yourself, whether we win or lose. And if things get very, very bad, you need to be able to say, I really tried, I really did what I could, along with other people. I didn't just sign a petition, didn't just give £5 a month to Friends of the Earth. I didn't just have one or two conversations with my neighbours or my family and try to persuade them a bit. I really did what I could. And that is an unavoidable responsibility that faces each and every one of us. And once you know it, you cannot turn away from it. And now, friends, I'm sorry to have to tell you that you do all know it. Thank you.